ranking every single Sonyverse Spider-Man spin-off movie from worst to best. It is really absolutely insane when you think about the fact that since 2018, we have gotten 6 of these Sonyverse Spider-Man films, starting with Venom, obviously now ending with Kraven the Hunter, and it seems like they're finally done with this universe and pulling the plug on it. No more are going to be made. But in this time period that we've gotten 6 Spider-Man spin-offs without Spider-Man in them, we've only had 4 true Spider-Man films, 2 Spider-Verse films, and 2 of the MCU. That's absolutely crazy to think about. In last place for me will forever be Morbius. This movie was painful to sit through, and it's not even so dumb that it's entertaining like some of the other ones. It's just dumb, and just nobody in this film cares about being here, especially Jared Leto. Like, making a movie about an anti-hero vampire that's kind of like a superhero at the same time should be the easiest way to make something so cool and dope, but this movie lacks all sauce. It's so bland. It looks terrible. Even great actors like Matt Smith in this movie are just terrible, because again, you can tell they don't want to be in this film. The only highlight is his dancing scene. That is still hilarious to this day. Like, come on, Morbius was already like a D-tier comic book character. Like, nobody outside of superfans probably even knew who he was. Why did they make this a movie? I really don't know. It was hilarious seeing them get trolled to put this movie back out into the theaters though, because of the response online. At 5 is Madam Web. A lot of the same can be said about this. Like, Dakota Johnson sleepwalking through this movie just like Jared Leto was. This isn't even a superhero movie either. Like, she sees 5 seconds into the future throughout the film, and she doesn't really even become Madam Web until the very end of the film, which is a trend with all of these outside of the Venom films. They, some reason, are like, hey, we're not going to actually have them become the character until the very end, and like they were planning sequels or something. The other cool aspect of this movie in the trailers was like, okay, at least we're going to also get other Spider-Women in this. That might be something that gives this movie a little bit of charm. Nope, you don't see them besides in the very final scene of the film in a vision of the future. They never wear these suits or become the Spider-Women. I will say there are a few things in this movie that are just so dumb that I laughed out loud at, and visually it doesn't look terrible like Morbius does. At number 4 is Venom: The Last Dance. Listen, I know a lot of people had fun with this movie, and I'm happy for you, but this was just not what I wanted from a big final conclusion to Venom's story. First of all, we introduced so many brand new side characters in this film and focused so much on them that we barely get enough Venom and Eddie time. This movie really feels like it's just random scenes stitched together and not actually a coherent story. There's just so many dumb decisions or things that make no sense that just happen out of nowhere. It feels like just to get to the next plot point without actually explaining it. I think the waste of Noel might be the biggest offense of this movie. You take a character that is pretty huge in the comics, you get Andy Serkis to voice him, put him in the trailers, and we all were expecting, oh, this is probably bait, but hoping this is the big final Venom film. Maybe they'll actually have him be in it a decent amount. No, he sits on his stupid toilet the entire movie and does nothing, which leaves the movie to have essentially no villain. The only thing they fight against are these like faceless alien creature things that are essentially just invincible besides of one weakness. They're so boring and bland. We needed a real villain. You can't just have faceless aliens that don't talk or do anything as your main foe. I'm sorry, the montage at the end with the Maroon 5 song is one of the dumbest scenes I've ever seen in my life. I laughed out loud, and it's supposed to be like a semi-serious. Obviously, they know it's goofy too, but it was so stupid. At number 3, I have Kraven the Hunter. I will have at the very end of the video my full review linked if you want to check it out, but I actually did have a lot of fun with it. Yes, it is stupid and a bad movie overall. Absolutely terrible dialogue. The writing's bad. The performance and line delivery of almost everybody in this film outside of like Russell Crowe and some Aaron Taylor Johnson lines is terrible, but at least feels like a movie that embraces how stupid it is. I was laughing all throughout this just because of how dumb it was. And actually, once this film gets going, which does take a long time because we spend way too much focusing on a young Kraven flashbacks and his origin story, but once we get to the third act, it's actually pretty enjoyable. Like, I think the final fight in this film is actually very entertaining. Now, the final scene of the movie is a different story, but it had me going for a while there in the third act. Definitely does benefit a little bit from having the R rating, although I wish they went a little bit farther with the action scenes and the violence. It felt like they were still holding back a bit in some sequences, but definitely better action than any of these other films. I won't show you the Rhino's face in case you haven't watched the trailers, and it's kind of spoiler-y, but everybody knows he's the villain of this movie, and I'm sorry, he is so stupid in this. He's on par with a Madam Web villain of being one of the worst I've ever seen. Every line that comes out of his mouth is absolutely terrible. And number 2 is Venom: Let There Be Carnage. Again, the same can be said for a lot of these. This is a dumb movie, but I also think there are some really great action sequences, especially with the Venom fights in this movie, which is what I want. And Woody Harrelson is one of my favorite actors. He's just so utterly cartoony as Carnage in this film that it's impossible to not have fun watching him. It's definitely a messy movie. There's things that don't really make sense or are just stupid decisions, but like I said, there is just so much fun to be had with this movie that I can't really have it lower on the list. I gotta be honest with myself. Number one for me is the first Venom film. Like, if they just did this one spin-off and left it at that, it's funny how much better Sony would be perceived, because they've been like, hey, they did this one thing that was definitely milking the Spider-Man brand, but it was actually a pretty solid movie. Like, this is actually a good film. Every Venom transformation, and especially the first one in this, is so great. The villain is kind of weak, but he's not bad and just straight up corny like the other ones are. Like, he's just kind of a bland villain, which I'm honestly okay with. Really fun action and stuff with Eddie first figuring out everything with Venom is such a blast. Tom Hardy is so good in all of these movies, really. Just the other ones kind of waste him a little bit more than in this first film. His relationship with Michelle Williams, who plays Anne, I believe I got that name right, also is really strong in this film, and something a lot of the other ones are missing. Like, they all try to have a romantic subplot, but none of them worked as well as this one, and it's probably because Michelle Williams is like an amazing actress who's way too good to be in these types of movies. I gotta be honest, I'm a little upset we never got that solo Black Cat movie before they ended the Sony universe, but it's probably for the best that this universe is put to rest. No more films coming from it. Let me know your ranking of this in the comments below, and like I said, tap above me to watch my Kraven the Hunter review.